Welcome to the Real Estate Syndication Show. Whether you are a seasoned investor or building a new real estate business, this is the show for you. Whitney Sewell talks to top experts in the business. Our goal is to help you master real estate syndication. And now your host, Whitney Sewell.
This is your daily real estate syndication show. I'm your host, Whitney Sewell. Today our guest is Davide Pio. Thanks for being on the show, David.
Thanks, Whitney.
David is a broker, associate, and investment consultant, co-founder at BG Asset Management, certified commercial investment member instructor, and specializes in asset portfolio reallocation and repositioning, including asset planning strategies, 1031, tax-deferred exchanges, and other complex investment structures. Well, David, that's things we all have to be somewhat familiar with or need to be, right? But it's unfortunate that a lot of times people make big decisions about selling or buying or usually selling at times when they shouldn't. And I'm looking forward to getting into that a little bit today with you. But tell the listeners a little more about who you are, maybe where you're located and your focus right now in the industry.
Yeah, so I'm located in the San Francisco Bay Area. I've been in real estate for 14 years. I got in during the worst plausible time, right just as the Great Recession was happening. So that was fun, to say the least. Kind of got started from there. Used some old sales techniques to kind of know how to work with the people I knew well. And at this time, in the San Francisco Bay Area, you can buy, units at 50 grand a pop, 50 grand a door, which is insane. And a lot of people at that time just didn't trust the stock market. The stock market. So they were able to take a lot of their assets out of the stocks, minimal tax consequences, and put into real estate. And it's one of those kind of snowballing effects where, you help one client, they tend to come back within a couple years time frame. And then they have friends and family, and they have friends and family. It kind of snowballs and snowballs from there. 80+% of what I do is on any given year about, apartment deals. The other 20%, 15+% tends to be in the industrial sector, mainly because my family's background, they've been in the trucking industry since before I was born. So I kind of grew up with it. So it's kind of been the second extension of me. I do random houses locally for family friends since I did that for my first year or so. It's just a matter of memorizing forms in California. And yeah, that's kind of the gist of it. I do random one-off deals here and there, a few triple net deals here and there. And last year, for some reason, I happened to have 2 sizable church deals. So that was fun to learn all the tax laws when it comes to churches and nonprofits. But that's the general gist of things.
Interesting. Okay. I wanted to ask you, you said you got in during the Great Recession, I assume, around 2008. And was that right before? And then, it went way down for you, or were you like in at the right time where you could
I started
catch it on the way up?
I got my license in 2006, but I didn't actually start until 2007. And thank God at that time I was 23, I believe, and I still lived at home. And I had a decent amount of money in the savings account when I quit my old job and started real estate full time. So my first year, I actually made negative money. Never knew you could do that, but tends to happen. And then the year after that, I got lucky with a handful of deals. Some people knew that I'd been doing business for 2 years. They didn't really know or trust anyone. And it kind of snowballed since then. And every year, for the most part, it's kind of been a gradual increase, family, friends of family, friends of friends, clients that find out about you through referrals and things like that.
Nice. So I was going to ask you, if everything went down, why did you stay in? It sounds like
I kind of I did pretty decent my second year, and I was like, all right, I can do this, and especially knowing since people, this is when everyone was struggling. I remember I did a price drop on a property that was referred to me from LA or something like that, and people were like, oh my God, you did a price drop, you're going to kill all the comps, and I went, they're not going to sell it at this price. What does it matter? So right. It was a very interesting time.
You mentioned you made negative money. What just for our listeners that don't understand what you're talking about, what do you mean?
Oh, I made $0. And then I still had expenses. So I had to literally pay for things and had money going out. And of course, in real estate, you're an independent broker. So you get to write that stuff off. So I literally showed negative income on my taxes.
Nice. So you were hooked then, right?
Oh yeah, tell me about it.
So, it's interesting, like in your business, I mean, whether you're on the active side like myself, whether you're a broker, it's so important that you understand some of the tax implications, right? And when you're speaking with sellers and things like that, so that you can help explain some of those implications when they're making these decisions. And sounds like, you've really become, an expert in some of these things. So I think you've been able to help some sellers in the process. Why don't we get into maybe an example that you've had recently, and let's just jump in a little bit to how you were able to help this seller through thinking through some of these tax implications that were happening or what's going to happen.
Yeah, sure. So I always tell people I'm not an accountant, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm one of those weird nerdy people that I like to catch up on what's going on with the accounting laws, like the CARES Act and the new stuff they're passing now, which they're kind of passing almost on a weekly basis with everything that's going on with the coronavirus. And then in addition to that, I'm one of those weird people that I like to go to the bar association and listen to people duke it out. I remember one of the most interesting ones was listening to a landlord attorney and a tenant attorney for retail debate like 3 line items for about 4 hours. And you start to learn all these nuanced things from each side and perspective. So when you start to see lease clauses, you start to see how the attorneys see it and the extremes that it could be taken into. But the thing I do is I like to try to take that knowledge and bring it in. Most real estate deals, I feel like the short-sighted thing is a lot of real estate deals are going to be, you sell and you buy. Maybe the most complex thing is you do a 1031 exchange. There's literally been times where I told people not to sell. Case in point, the one we were briefly talking about before we went on air is had a potential client that I knew. He was referred to me by a long-term client that I had been done 8, 9, 10 deals with. They were very close friends, almost family, but not quite. They had been neighbors for 20 plus years. And I visited his house. And as we're walking in, the neighbor had kind of gave me a little bit of a summary and a heads up on things. And I asked him, how long does this guy own this property? He said, oh, like 35 years. And as we were walking through the door, I said, I'm going to talk myself out of a deal. Just watch. Walked to this guy's house, apartment building located in the East Bay. And he's literally got my competitor's listing agreement, not signed, but filled out on his desk. And the guy's in his late 70s, super sharp, watching Jeopardy. And we start talking, and in summary, he explains to me that he's the investor of the family. His kids aren't. His kids are all older. They're in their 50s and 60s, but one's a teacher, they don't do investments. That's his thing. And he didn't want to overburden them by passing away because he was in his late 70s and leaving them with the issues. And long story short, I told him the price was about $1 million. My competitor said, give or take $25,000. We're in the same ballpark. And I said, what are you going to do? Are you going to 1031 exchange it? No, it's too much work. I don't want to burden them. I said, do you understand your tax bill with federal and state and depreciation recapture is going to be, the rough number was about $350,000. So you sell for $1 million, you walk away with $650,000. And he goes, I didn't know all these taxes were going to come into play, blah, blah, blah. And I said, can I give you an alternative suggestion? He goes, yeah. And I said, have someone manage it for you and wait till you die. And he looks at me and I go, I know it's morbid, and I explained to him the estate tax law, where in summary, when you pass away and your kids inherit your property, your stocks, and things like that, it gets reassessed as if they had purchased it for the value that the day you passed. And I gave him a quick example, like an Apple stock that you buy for $1, you sell it $100, you pay $65 in taxes. But if you pass away and it goes to your kids, it's as if your kids bought it at $100. They're not going to pay at any profit unless it sells above $100. And he looks at me and he goes, so he goes, that's a really good idea. I never thought about that. How do you get paid? And I said, well, normally I would bill you $300 an hour, but I'm not going to do that for 2 hours of my time. Hopefully your kids call me when you die. And I go, I know it's morbid, but any references, I'll be more than happy to help. And sure enough, about 4 or 5 years later, the guy passed away. I was invited to the funeral. I was one of, I don't know, probably about 50 people. It was a relatively small funeral. And, I basically hung out with the neighbor and one of his nephews that I knew just a little bit that I had met in the last couple of years. And they said, hey, you should go introduce yourself to the kids who were in their, again, 50s or 60s at this point. And I went there and one of the daughters recognized me and she goes, The lawyer gave me your card. We know exactly who you are. We'll call you when all this stuff is done. And sure enough, they sold the property. They paid zero taxes. You know, between me and the attorney and the accountant, we kind of had everything on the same thing. And it's one of those things where I could have very easily just sold the deal and been done. And a lot of brokers, I feel, look at that point. I like to look at things a little more nuanced because that's how you solidify business. When they're attorneys and they're accountants who they pay, you know, have degrees on the wall and they pay $500 or $1,000 an hour, say, yeah, the quote unquote dumb brokers, right? Listen to this person. You kind of solidify your client at that point.
Well, I feel like you had a long-term, just a long range in mind there. You added so much value literally to them that now I'm sure, you're probably the first person they think of if they meet a friend even that says, I got a piece of property I'm wanting to sell.
Yeah. And apparently the guy didn't have his trust in order. He had a will, but that was about it. And we talked about probate and how trusts help, kind of sidestep that, for lack of a better expression. And months, about 2 weeks later, the neighbor, my original client, called me, asked for 2 references of attorneys, and I gave him both that I had in the Bay Area. And I didn't know it was for that gentleman. And the guy's net worth ended up being 6, 7, 8 times more than what I thought it was, even though he lived in a relatively modest house. So, I mean, I didn't just save him the taxes, and the family had the taxes on the asset when they inherited it. It was on other things. I had no clue. So that one discussion led to them saving significantly much more on other assets that I didn't even know existed because I didn't know the whole story. So.
Wow. David, how did you educate yourself about the tax side of this? I mean, a lot of people, I feel like whether you're a broker, you're an active syndicator like myself, I mean, you spend so much time learning so much about investing in commercial real estate, but we don't always understand the tax side or the implications, right? Or, and how did you educate yourself?
I like to think I'm smart, but mainly just because I borrow stuff from everyone else. I'm definitely no genius. I ask a ton of questions, and my questions always have more questions. I've never been the type of person that gets scared to ask, the old saying, the squeaky wheel gets the oil kind of a thing. So there's been tons of situations where, a lot of my fundamentals came from CCIM, which, CCIM teaches you a lot about depreciation and how that works and capital gains and basis and that kind of thing. And it takes a couple of classes and a significant amount of time in working on the spreadsheets, but I just put it in practice. That's an amazing foundation in the real estate world. I don't know how taxes works when it comes to businesses or employee deductions and things like that, because it's not my world, but that was a great fundamental thing. And from then you start hearing random terms, or you start seeing random speakers talk about these additional nuanced tricks of the trade, like QPERT, or these way that these wealth funds work. And it's a matter of, going online and doing as much research as you can, and you get a lot of basic fundamental knowledge about it and when it may be applicable, but I always have more questions. And it literally comes to the point where I call the people that kind of introduced it a little bit, or I just call people and say, hey, look, I'll pay you whatever you charge for 2 hours of your time. I've got 35 nuanced questions, and it usually builds into like 60 or 70 nuanced questions. Sure. But I take notes and things like that. And I don't have them all memorized, but I tend to keep things very organized. And the more you practice it, the more it works. Case in point, I mentioned I sold 2 churches in a year, which was a bit random. One of the churches I sold, I knew a significant amount of the questions, but the owner kept having more questions. He had 3-4 basic questions, which I had to go research, which led me to have another 10 more questions. So I ended up calling the State Board of Equalizations that deals with tax implications with the churches. And from that, I learned a ton of knowledge. Literally 9 months later, I went up for a listing appointment on an $8.8 million deal for a Hindu temple in the Bay Area. And the reason I got it over the other broker, which is, a big national brand, was because it was a nonprofit group, but they had very knowledgeable people that were accountants, engineers. One guy had owned and sold, I think, 3 or 4 businesses that he built from the ground up out in Silicon Valley. Very successful people, but real estate just wasn't their forte, but they definitely weren't, they knew a lot of conceptual stuff from other parts of their trade. And they had questions for about an hour and a half. And because I had already learned that knowledge literally 9 months before on a much smaller church deal, I was able to take literally those answers and relay it over to them. And sure enough, I got the listing and ended up selling it for a little more than $8 million with some creative financing in mind. So
wow,
it's things like that you learn the basic and you kind of just keep, intellectual curiosity is the best, is very, very, something I would highly, just as strong as motivation and drive. Intellectual curiosity may help you go a long way in any business.
awesome. Yeah, you're adding value, and in return, you're gaining value as well, no doubt about it. From your experience and the time that you've invested to learn these things. But tell me a little bit about the CCIM designation, and I've had numerous people on the show who have that. However, I don't think I just love your opinion. For the listeners who are thinking about, should I pursue that or not? I just wonder, who do you think really is best suited to pursue that, or maybe there's people who have it. You think, well, why in the world did you go after that?
Sure. So I found out by CCIM by accident. One of the best pieces of advice when I first got starting into this business from my broker was, when you start off, take as many classes as you can, because as you continue your career, it's going to be harder and harder to find time. Great piece of advice. Never forget that. And I still try to do it even now, that times that I'm super slammed. What CCIM, so you have the realtor umbrella. If anyone ever gets the chance to go to Chicago, they have literally the realtor building, and a lot of the realtor designations are in each floor. So IREM, which is basically the top designation for property managers, takes up a floor. CCIM takes up another floor. SIOR, which is for kind of like the good old boys club for the office and industrial group, is another floor, so on and so forth. And CCIM is basically 4 main classes with basically a 5th class. It's a bunch of nuanced elective courses, but it's 4 4-day classes plus another 5th week, 4 4-day classes. So it's class 1, that's 4 days, class 2, that's 4 days, and you have to usually travel around the country to do them. And then at the end, in addition to taking the classes, you have to do a portfolio showing that you not only have the knowledge, but you actually put it into practice. And it's for anyone, bankers, brokers, investors, people that do site selection. I actually met a guy that did site selection for all the West Coast McDonald's for the Western 3 or 4 states, which is amazing to have them in a class. You meet some very unique people. In summary, how I would recommend some of the classes is, and I remember someone told me this, and that's still the best example, is CCIM is basically a 1 or 2 semester MBA class crushed into 4 days and applicable to real estate. No theory, just this is actually how it works. And the guy that told me this was someone that had just graduated from Haas at Berkeley, which is one of the top, give or take, 3, 4, 5 business schools in the country. And he goes, I learned more in 1 class than I did in 1 or 2 semesters, and it's applicable to real estate.
Wow.
They give you great fundamental knowledge on taxes. Some of the other classes go into demographics, and financial analysis. Anyone that's thinking about getting into real estate or investing period should take at least the first class. That's what I always tell people, take the first class, because I feel like that should be something that everyone knows, just like how to change your oil or pay your taxes or, balance your books, kind of a thing. It's one of those fundamental things about investing that everyone should take. And then if you like real estate and you want to keep pursuing real estate in the commercial world, then you can take the other ones. But if you're a residential broker, an investor, take the first one. I've had people ask me if they should read books, if they should take the first class. The way that they teach and the way that it's the big, large groups like CBRE, Jones Lang LaSalle don't teach the basics of commercial real estate investing, because CCIM is, for lack of a better expression, perfected it, and they don't see the reason to reinvent the wheel. So it's very common that you get a lot of these big brokers from the big brokerage houses that come in and learn, and then they go pursue further skills inside CBRE, Marks and Millichap, Jones Lang LaSalle. But that's kind of the thing that everyone just sends their brokers to kind of get the fundamental training on how a lot of this analysis works.
Sure. So what about, you as a broker, if you're working with operators who are, obviously wanting deal flow and looking at deals that you have for sale, how does that work as far as, one that maybe has, it'll say they're on an even slate, you don't know either one of them yet, but one has that designation and the other one doesn't. What's your expectation then?
It's almost like an even understanding, right? If you meet someone and the first time you talk to them, it comes out somehow that they went to UC Berkeley or Stanford or MIT. There doesn't mean they're the smartest person in the world, doesn't mean they're a genius, doesn't mean that they're a nice person or a good person, but at least you have a fundamental thing of, you went to MIT, at least I know you have this level of competence and intelligence to graduate from MIT or graduate from Harvard or graduate from Stanford. It's the commercial version, it's the real estate version of that. It doesn't mean you're a genius, doesn't mean you're a pleasure to work with. It means there's at least a fundamental baseline of foundation where at least you can, okay, I don't have to build up to here. At least I know it can start from this level and it can only go up. That's the best way I would compare it.
That's great. No, that's great, David. I've just wondered that myself, and because I've known numerous people. We have numerous guests with that designation, but we haven't really talked about it in depth. But just a few final questions. What's a way you've recently improved your business that we could apply to ours?
When it comes to, if in the sense of a broker, the one thing is always prospect in good times and bad, even though it's tedious and everybody hates it. Whether it's warm calls to people just to keep in touch, especially in a time like now where everyone's kind of by force sitting in their house in most instances. I try to make it a point to call 5+ people a day. Do I get that way? No. But you'd be surprised what you find out just from family and friends and things like that. Like, oh, they no longer live here. They moved to another country. They live in this city. This is what's going on with their life. They have kids. Especially weird if you haven't talked to them in 1, 2, 3 years. But if the relationship's there, it's there. And if it's not, at least you'll know. It's not hey, I'll see you in a grocery store and say hello, and then it's going to be awkward forever. So that's gotten me deals. I still send people email blasts. That's super cheap. And just being present on social media, whether it's your personal social media or if you have a business one. I had a business social media, and except for my YouTube, for the most part, nothing ever came to fruition, even after long term. Whereas my personal social media, people know what I do. I don't talk about it all the time. It comes up sporadically, but those sporadic moments where it comes up, I will almost always have someone send me an inquiry of, hey, even if it's just a matter of, hey, I've got this situation, can you help? And again, it's one of those things where I'm pretty good on turning one deal into 2 or 3 because I look further down that line than just the sell and the purchase kind of a thing.
Wow. Great advice. What's the number one thing that's contributed to your success?
I'm really good at keeping in contact with people. Even when it has nothing to do with sales, I've always been good about being old school and calling people on their birthdays. I don't just send a random text message. I'm pretty good about responding to text messages in a timely manner. I'm not one of those people that has a million of those little red dots on my iPhone where I need to respond to 300 people. I can't be like that. I get mini ADD in that sense, but I'm pretty responsive. People appreciate that in the business life and personal life. And then like we started off saying, it's a snowball effect. So in the beginning, you start small, you do 2, 3, 4 deals, but as time goes, it gradually starts to increase. And as people see that you're doing volume, one of the problems I see is some people think maybe you get too big. So I've been doing this 14 years and people think that, oh, you won't do my small little deal that's, a couple $100,000 because you always, every time you do mention it, you do these large deals. I see it on your website. I go, no, I'll do small deals, medium, large. I don't care, right? I'm not going to help you buy a house for $100,000 in, Alabama because it's not my market, not my thing, but I'll find someone for you. So I always try to take care of people, but just keeping in contact with people, I think has definitely been my best asset for sure.
Is there a way that you track that or a tool that you use to keep up with that?
I literally got in a CRM a year ago and I have yet to use it, but my assistant's about to start using it because I got my assistant about 6 months ago that's wrapping up doing all my marketing now. No, it's just been, like I said, they've all been personal friends, people I know. I don't really call random people. It tends to be more people I know, and then it tends to kind of snowball from there. Soon, or recently, I should say, the last literally pre-corona, about for like 2 weeks, I was starting to make cold calls. So that was new because I'd probably done before then like 9 cold calls my whole life, and they were somewhat targeted. But it's one of those things that I know I got to start getting in the habit of, and it's again, my thing has kind of always been the email blasts and social media and YouTube. That's kind of been my deal flow, and just generally keep in contact with people by whatever method they, works for them.
And how do you like to give back?
In what sense?
Anyway that you like to give back to others, or it may be.
I love to teach. I've always liked to. I feel one of my strengths is I feel like I'm really good at explaining a complex concept and kind of making it really simple to a layman, regardless of what your background is, whether it's cars or whatever. And I feel like I can change that relationship, whether it's whatever nuanced thing that works for you and clicks in your head. And I feel like that's always been one of my strengths. I remember trying to learn things about electricity, and I read up on it and I watched a million YouTube videos and just never clicked. And finally one guy sat with me and he explained it to me the same way they all do on, online 2-3 times. And finally by the third time he goes, I got a good way to explain it to me. And he gave me a little bit different nuanced version, and it all clicked. And I went, now I get it. Right. And it's that light bulb when you explain to people, and then later on, the same way the same appreciation I get when I help my clients later on that, I started off when I started with a little condo, and now I've got, 10 units under my belt, and my house and all my rent is, my mortgage is almost entirely subsidized by my investments, and I can just go quit my job whenever I want. That's very satisfying to me. The same way if someone can say, hey, you did this for my career. I started here, but you taught me how to kind of go through this path, and you've helped me with random questions along the way. Now I'm here on my career, and it's happened where even some people get close to where I'm at, and I'm like, wow, it's impressive. Like, I'm not mad,
Yeah.
So
Awesome.
I really enjoy teaching for sure.
Awesome, David. We appreciate how you've given back today to the listeners and myself, and just appreciate your time. Tell them how they can get in touch with you and learn more about you.
Yeah. So my website is iliveinthebayarea.com. Nuance to say, I do stuff all around the country, although the Bay Area is kind of my stomping grounds, the San Francisco Bay Area. You can easily Google me by my name, David Pio, or my phone number is 510-815-2000.
Thank you for listening to the Real Estate Syndication Show, brought to you by LifeBridge Capital. LifeBridge Capital works with investors nationwide to invest in real estate, while also donating 50% of its profits to assist parents who are committing to adoption. LifeBridge Capital, making a difference, one investor and one child at a time. Connect online at www.lifebridgecapital.com for free material and videos to further your success.